welcome to the Cardboard Herald. My name is Jack, and we're going to talk about games, gamers, and why we play. So this is episode 2. Thank you so much for listening to episode 1, if you have listened to episode 1, and thank you so much for listening to episode 2. This is going to be our first interview podcast with Mike Heiman. I am so proud of this conversation to be able to present it to you, and so thankful to him for participating in this and having the patience for being the first interviewee of the Cardboard Herald. So here's what's going on around the site. If you listened to last episode, you know that what we're going to do on this podcast feed is talk about updates to the website, www.cardboardherald.com, what's kind of going on with us and other contributors to the site during the week, and then we're going to have a main feature segment for the rest of the podcast. That may be a mailbag, it may be a reviewer's diary where we dive into what's actually involved in the creation of the content for the site, or it may be an interview like this. I'm hoping to really mix it up and have a lot of great content for you down the road, so definitely stay tuned. So new things I wanted to talk about. We have a YouTube channel now. That's The Cardboard Herald. The first video on there is an unboxing of Mystic Veil, Veil of Magic. We have our first feature article on the website, and that's regarding expansions and LCGs. It's really just kind of a thought piece on the state of the industry and games as platforms for future content rather than standalone products, and what that means for us as gamers and consumers of these products. Then we also have this podcast, which is on iTunes now. That it is really crazy and absolutely flattering to me, and I'm incredibly proud that in such a short time we've been able to provide so much good content, and it's already showing up on outlets like iTunes. So I'm going to say this at the end of the podcast as well, but it would mean the world to us if you were to rate us on iTunes. First off, subscribe to us on iTunes, but rate us on iTunes. That makes a huge difference in visibility down the road, and it's also going to give us the critical feedback that we need in order to give you what you want out of a fantastic gaming site. We're going to be doing a mailbag episode for the next podcast, so if you have any questions, comments, concerns, anything about the creation of the site, what we've done so far, what we plan to do, or just any general gaming questions that you may possibly have, please send them to us by email at cardboardherald@gmail.com, or you can get to us at Twitter at Cardboard Herald, or just leave a comment on any of the posts on the site. We'll be able to see them there. So the interview itself, this was the first interview that we have done. It was actually an experiment before we launched the site to see if we could plop down a mic in between two wonderful individuals and have a conversation and see how that would go. Unfortunately, for some reason, I didn't account for ambient sound in a house I'm not used to, and there were cats and alarm clocks and all kinds of stuff like that that I should have foreseen. But the interview was too good to scrap. So we've edited it down into a listenable and fantastic conversation. The heart of the conversation is here. I had to take out a couple parts because of craziness that I didn't anticipate. But it's all part of the learning process, and we're only going to get better as we go on. So the audio quality is also a little bit weird because we've been toying around with new equipment here, so this sounds so buttery smooth right now. It's a little echoey in the rest of it, but I'm really proud of this conversation. Mike Heiman is a print and play board game designer. He is on Board Game Geek under Mike Heim, Heim, and also he's a fantastic dude. He's a middle school teacher here in Juneau, Alaska, and he's an excellent friend. So without further ado, Here's the interview with Mike Heiman, and I'll talk to you at the end of the episode. For those of you who don't know Mike, he's published a few print and play board games on Board Game Geek. I was looking at them today. You have 3 listings right now?
The ones that I can think of right now are Deep Deep Dungeon. That was my first one, and that's on an 8.5 by 14 legal size. And it is a dungeon crawl where you're just going down in a dungeon. Almost sort of a free... you choose the trip that you want to take from room to room. There's a background, isometric background that drops down, and you choose the path that you want to take from room to room. And when you get to another room, you do a roll. It's just a basic sort of dungeon delve roll sort of thing.
So that's the one that I've actually played, and when I first played that, it was actually upon you saying, hey, I publish print and play games, and you had a couple sheets of that available.
That game there was made completely 100% in Microsoft Word, for Mac. So there was no Photoshop in there at all.
That's amazing and blows my mind. And then you have 1572, The Lost Expedition, right? And we're going to get to that because that's probably the thing that actually blew up kind of big. And then there was another listing on there, Fought Wheels, Matchbox Wars.
Okay.
Is that a up and coming project?
Oh no, it's already been published. It was for a contest. And it was a War Games miniatures contest, and I placed on that. I don't remember exactly what I placed. The rule book is pretty large. The rule book is probably about 16 pages, and I decided for that. I did use Photoshop, but I decided on that one to kind of go with the whole retro Car Wars theme.
Okay, well, I want to go back a little bit. Like I said, 1572 is probably going to be kind of the where we're at right now. But you mentioned playing games as a teenager. You grew up here in Juneau, Alaska?
I grew up mostly here in Juneau, Alaska. We moved here to Juneau in 1976. 1979 to Juneau. 1976 to Alaska, to Anchorage. And then moved down here in 79. Won some.
Your folks got smart.
Well, we won some homestead property and tried that, and we were not the sourdough homestead type people. So my mom put us on a boat and said, "We're going to Juneau. If you want to stay here on this godforsaken island, that's fine. You do that." But so my dad came with us, and he ended up selling the property, and kind of has been kicking himself in the butt since then. But anyway, just living here in Juneau this is the place where I really got into gaming. In 8th grade at Floyd Dryden Middle School, there were clubs or study hall. If you were doing so great, you'd have to go to study hall. But if you're doing fine, then the last hour of every Friday was club time. And you could go to a club. The club that I signed up with my friends, with my friend from across the street, was Board Game Club. And that was in Mr. Nash's room, which is a room that I've actually taught in now as well.
So your friend and you signed up for Board Game Club. Was that something he dragged you into, or was it something that you guys were just like, oh man, the rest of this sounds super lame, let's just sign up for this? Why board games?
We did like board games. We played some miniatures type stuff, and we also played a long-standing role-playing game called FASA Star Trek, the role-playing game, and it had some spaceship combat in it as well, which we really got into, and then from there got into Starfleet Battles.
And this was a published, licensed RPG?
It was. So we decided board games. So we got into that club. We were introduced to Diplomacy, played that a lot in that club, and Axis and Allies, played those 2 games. Plus Mr. Nash was really big into sort of incorporating some board game type stuff in his teaching, And one thing that he did for American Revolution, which really hooked me, is he made us create an American Revolution battleship game of all the different American Revolution major battles. So we had to sort of look at what the battlefield looked like, draw it out, create a grid on there, and then we'd have to look at the forces from each side and say, for instance, if the American forces had 6,000 troops and the British forces had 1,500 or 15,000 troops, then the American forces would get 6 places to put their people on their card, and the British would get 15 places to put their people on their card. And if you hit a place that has a person, you get to go again. So it sort of evened itself out in the long run.
Was that your first little experimentation into designing a game?
I guess so. As an assignment, it was. As when we designed our own game, we designed a game later on called The Lost Crown, and that was my friend Phil and I, we've been designing that we ended up designing that for a good 10 years or so, The Lost Crown.
So Phil, was he your buddy who joined the club with you and everything?
Yes, Phil is my friend who lived right across the street from me. He was the best man at my wedding down in Texas, and I was the best man at his wedding here in Juneau. And anytime that we drive cross country, we have made it a point to stop off in Montana where he lives.
So tell me about this game that you guys designed. I mean, where's that? It took you 10 years to make. Did you actually come up with something that you felt comfortable with other people playing?
Oh yeah, we've had other people play, and it's been hit or miss. It depends on what people are into. The Lost Crown, it is a game where you are creating a party, just so many different sort of characters, at least 12 races, like humans, half-orcs, tree ants, the regular types
the classic fantasy.
Yeah, it was a fantasy trope game. And so you create this party. So that's one part of it, is you try to create this sort of party that complements itself, that supports itself so that it can get out there and do things, which includes having a cleric or a healer and having a heavy hitter and having a tank, those type of things. And then you move across this land going from one map, which is one hex, 8.5 by 11 hex map full of hexes, and you go across there to another map zone, and in that other map zone there is a certain place in that map zone you have to get to, and when you get there you roll dice to see what your clue is and what the boss monster is that you have to fight. But as you're walking through, every single time you stop for the night, you have to roll for wandering monsters. So it's a very random sort of move, roll for wandering monsters, encounter them, deal with them. You can deal with them peacefully, not usually.
It almost sounds like you guys were really inspired by something like Fallout or some computer RPGs, having these, or even Japanese RPGs that were coming out where you'd have these random battles that happen and how you approach them, that kind of thing.
Except that this was Nintendo SCNS
days,
so it was
Nintendo
way before any of that type of stuff.
Well, Final Fantasy 1 came out
before Final Fantasy 1.
Oh, okay.
So I think that we got started in this in let's see if I can get the date right, or the year right. 1986 or 1987.
I think Final Fantasy may have made its debut in the United States, 86.
It might have.
But maybe it didn't influence you. Maybe you guys were drawing on the same inspiration for that kind of thing. And that means you've been designing games pretty much your entire life, since you were a kid. Younger than it sounds like, than the kids that you actually teach in school today.
About that age.
So have you... I've seen a couple of your designs that haven't made it to Board Game Geek or publishing or that kind of thing. And I know even now you're still looking at anything that you can create as far as a new design. And you're telling me about all this history of growing up and designing games. Do you know what the impetus for some of that is? Like, why was it not enough to play games?
Well, anytime I play a game, I always think about, okay, I understand the rules here. Boy, I wish I would have done this a little bit differently. And then I think, how can I reskin this so that it's not necessarily this game, but have it so that it has some of those qualities about it? Or how can I take these two games and mash them together so that it makes a game where I can take the elements from this game that I really like and the elements of this game that I really like and put it together? I did that with a game that I have on Board Game Geek in the forums called Cryptic, and that I completely got my inspiration from Codenames when I played that, I think, over at your house. And I wanted a Codename sort of game that could be played with maybe younger kids, and it was for a 9-card micro game contest. So what can I do with 9 cards to make like an actual game out of it?
Almost for anyone, there's that moment where board games go from being one thing in your mind to a different thing, or maybe that's going to happen several times. Like for me, for instance, as a kid, board games were Monopoly, Clue, Scrabble, the usual ones, and oddly enough, we had a copy of Scotland Yard.
Love that game.
I played that occasionally with my brother and my mom, but I don't know where my brother got it, but he came home with a copy of Hero Quest one day, and I was probably in 2nd or 3rd grade. And we played that, and that broke apart my world as far as what my conception of board games and even gaming in general could be. And that's really what introduced the concepts of role-playing to me. We ended up going on and playing things like Dragon Strike and eventually Dungeons and Dragons and that kind of stuff. Lots of dungeon crawly type of sword and sorcery stuff.
Yeah, I think that the very first one that I can really think of is there was a game when I was in high school that was just released called Fortress America. And I believe it was by Hasbro, Milton Bradley. And it was pretty much one person is the defender and everybody else are the attackers. So it has some similarities to Descent, those type of games where you have an overlord as a bad guy and everybody else are the good guys. It was a war game too, and I was a big war game person back in high school. I knew all of the different aircraft, the World War II aircraft, most of the World War I aircraft, all the different World War II battleships and their armament. I knew all that type of stuff. I was really into the military aspect. Fortress America is a futuristic war game, miniatures war game, where there are different miniatures where one person is America and then 3 other people are the attackers trying to attack America. and you have pretty much the Soviets on the East Coast. You have maybe it's the Soviets, the Chinese, I think, on the West Coast.
This is the most Cold War sounding game I've ever heard of.
So the Soviets, the Chinese, and then coming up from underneath is sort of like the Cuban-led group. And
of course.
they have a certain amount of turns to win the game. And America, all you have to do as America is prevent them from reaching certain spots on the map. And that's all you have to do. But they have an endless supply. It's like the tide coming in. And you're trying to keep the tide out, as futile as that might sound. And that's what you're trying to do. And so we noticed that there were certain things that you could do as the American player where you would always win. Because there's things that you could do where you can actually nuke your own land and make that spot unpassable. So you could, early in the game, just start nuking land up in the upper plains area around the last spot they need to get to so they can't get there. And so what my friends and I did, instead of deciding who's going to play America and who's going to play whatever, we adapted that game so that America would be an AI player, and the 3 of us would try to work together to try to defeat America. And that changed it because we made a cooperative game.
So you were breaking apart games as a kid. What are you, 14, 15?
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
That's crazy. So you were talking about the fascination with the military aspect of things. You ended up joining the Marine Corps. Did you do that right out of high school?
Before high school.
Before high school?
I joined the Marine Corps at 17.
Wow. So. But you graduated high school?
Graduated high school and then went into the Marine Corps. Yep.
Do you think that your interest in war games played any aspect in your interest in joining the armed forces?
I don't think so. It may have, but I don't think so. I joined the Marine Corps because I came from a family that didn't really have a lot of money to send me to college. School was always super easy for me, and I wanted a challenge. And my friend Paul joined the military and didn't tell me about it, and I thought, well, if you can do it, I sure can. So I decided to do it too, and went into the military and had 4 years in the Marine Corps, and it was great. In the Marine Corps, I didn't really play much board games, but I did have a very dedicated Dungeons and Dragons group in the Marine Corps where I was the DM, and that was all second edition at that time.
So this was here in the U.S. You were in Hawaii for a while, right?
In Hawaii, we played it in Hawaii and also in Okinawa, my gaming group. But when we were deployed elsewhere, we didn't have time and didn't bring the resources to play it. It's nice
Sure,
thing about Dungeons and Dragons. You could pack up player's handbook and a DMG and maybe a monster manual, which I had. So I had those 3 books, and we had dice that we originally started sharing, but then people would get their own dice, and that was it.
So you weren't actually packing the monstrous manual in Kuwait or anything like that?
No, and back then it was the monster manual. They didn't have a monstrous manual.
Okay.
But they also had Fiend Folio.
I thought Advanced Dungeons and Dragons is when they introduced the monstrous manual.
I think they did, but I don't... Is that second edition? I guess that is second edition. I believe there was a reboot of second edition with thicker books that were glossy covered.
Those are the ones that I had. My older brother had those, and I remember being in 3rd and 4th grade tracing every single monster in there on other paper.
We decided to play that instead of playing on the Nintendo or the Genesis, which was really hot with a lot of the Marines back then, or the Game Boys, which was really, really hot back then. Pretty much every Marine that I knew played Nintendo or Genesis at the time. Everybody did, except I didn't really play that much of it. My friends and I, we played Dungeons and Dragons instead, and there wasn't really any sort of stigma about that.
When you were playing D&D, were you actually creating your own adventures, or were you going off of supplemental adventures that the game provided?
There was a magazine released a while back called Dungeon, which had some small dungeons in it, and some of them would go from month to month. We'd play about once a weekend, maybe every other weekend, and I'd get those and I would tweak them to sort of fit our made up realm that we were playing in, our area that we were playing in. It was a very different sort of Dungeons and Dragons than I've played before or since, because everybody was very military minded and everybody was playing as almost like trained military. Like they would go up to a door, they'd listen. If there's sounds behind the door, then they would do things in a very military sort of operation, which we learned as Marine security guards for aircraft carriers. So, which was pretty much kick open the door. First of all, someone would get a fireball online. They would kick open the door, the fireball would go in, explode, and then everybody would rush into the room and try to get a surprise round off.
I'm seeing Call of Duty breaches right now in my mind.
And that's how they played Dungeons and Dragons. It was just like, all right, we're going to this room, we're doing this, we're doing it like this, and people would come up with a sort of SMEAC plan, a fire plan of how they're going to approach things, and it was fairly militaristic when I played with them.
Board games specifically kind of wanes as you're in the military. You focus more on tabletop role-playing games. You get out of the military. What is it that kind of brings you back to the tangible objects on the table?
Well, I get out of the military and I come back here to Juneau, where my good friend Phil lives and where my family is. And Phil is somebody that I've gamed with for a very long time, and he's still great at games. So it was an easy fit to get right back into Starfleet Battles, which we played fairly regularly, which is a very heavy, like miniatures war game, a hex and chit board game with, it's extremely complex, many levels of complexity to it. So got back into doing that. So it was pretty much SFB. One of the other guys that we played with, he owns a shop here in town, and in his shop he also sold some board games on the side. And every now and then he'd have a board game night to invite us over and show us a certain game that he's interested in.
I did want to get back to where we are now, which is you just released 1572, The Lost Expedition this year, right?
Yes, I think in April or May it was published.
How long were you working on that game?
Oh, maybe 4 or 5 months, maybe 4 months or so.
Where'd the inspiration come from for that?
The inspiration for that came from B-17, Flying Fortress B-17, which is a solitaire sort of one-page game. It was for a one-page print and play contest. It was a one-page game, and I wanted something that captured that one-page sort of thing, and I wanted something that brought in some of the mechanics of B-17, which is you roll dice and then you respond to what you roll. But I wanted a storytelling aspect to it as well, which as you roll dice, you take those dice, you can re-roll them, you use those as planning dice to decide what your team is doing at a certain time. And then you roll on these subtables, and the story sort of pulls you in a certain direction. And it's not necessarily a good direction. It's a very difficult game, and usually you end up dying very, very slowly. You start out with six people, and they slowly get killed off one at a time. But you're trying to get to the end of the game before they get killed. My inspiration comes from B-17, Flying Fortress, and also I wanted something. It comes from doing Source of the Nile, which was a hex and explore game where you go. There's an entire blank board of Central Africa, or almost all of Africa, actually, a board of most of Africa, and all the hexes are blank, and it's on dry erase, sort of a dry erase paper type of dry erase plastic or wet erase plastic. So as you're going through there, you're actually drawing the terrain. And I wanted a game where you created the world in the game. I wanted a game where you created the world and it told a story. And so I did that as a game for a contest, and it was a one-page print and play contest. I'm really not keen on one-page contests where you have to cut out lots of different chits and cut out all these different things. So I just made this so that you could print it and play it without doing anything.
That's what originally blew me away about Deep Dungeon, is that it was, pretty much self-contained. It had all the elements there aside from some dice. So 1572 gets reviewed by, is it Marco Arnaudo?
Yes,
the European
Marco Arnaudo.
Reviewer.
He's a big reviewer, especially wargame reviewer, and with a pretty big, very well known with Essen.
Watch out, Marco Arnaudo. You think you're a big reviewer? I got Mike here on the podcast.
I absolutely owe so much of that game's, I guess, attention to his review, because he's usually a very critical reviewer, and people want him to review their games, and he will sometimes give a very critical review. He has very high standards, and he's very easy to follow on his reviews. I didn't ask him anything. He wanted something to review. Not necessarily to review. He didn't even want it to review it. He just wanted something simple to play on a plane. There is this new movement to table or tray top airplane tray top games. Something that can fit on a tray in an airplane that you can play right there on the tray and doesn't require all these different parts. So he saw that game and he went, okay, I guess I'll download and try this. He downloaded it, he tried it, he really loved it. He said that it's a game that spoke to him, and ever since he said that, it really exploded because he's got quite the following over many different countries. So since then, it has been downloaded and the page has been visited many times. I think a couple of weeks ago, somebody let me know that 1572 has been downloaded and played 1,572 times now by people all over the world.
Which is incredibly more than anything else that you've put online.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
And like I said, I really think that I know that it's because of Marco's review of it.
So has this gotten you any attention by any publishers, anyone who'd be interested in you making games that aren't print and play?
Well, there is somebody, Patrick Leader, he was very interested in Deep Dungeon. And one that I'm making right now that's in a progress is called Gelatinous Cube Dice, which is a mint tin game. A mint tin game, that is a game, the entire game can fit into a mint tin, like an Altoids mint tin, the entire thing. So I have a game where it's kind of puzzle game and kind of a role-playing game, but the theme, it's a very thematic, which is a fantasy theme. And Patrick Leader is all into that, and so he's been following that. And I've had some great play tests and some feedback for that game. And that's where you're just a cube die, just like a 6-sided die, and you have to flip your die, flipping it along from room to room along these squares in a room, along these spots in a room, flipping it along, and you try to land on a certain spot in the room with the 6 up and then get out of the room before you run out of time. So it's sort of a puzzle. You have to look at what you currently have rolled, and then from there, as you move, tilting it the correct way to get to a 6 and then get out of the room in a certain amount of moves as sort of a puzzle game. But then when you get through enough of those rooms, your cube levels up and you get a power. So it gets more difficult and so on. Are
you considering publishing that one?
It will be published through Board Game Geek. I'm publishing it not to make money, and I don't want to make money off of any of the things that I work on. I want that to just be something out there for people to enjoy, because I really enjoy other people's print and play games.
I guess what I'm asking is, making money aside, do you view this as something that will get manufactured rather than this is going to be a print and play?
If it's manufactured, it won't be manufactured by me. Not in the foreseeable future. It's not on my plans. I'm having a baby in a few weeks, so that I've heard kind of changes your world.
Yeah.
And we'll see. I'm not making much plans past that, besides, of course, keeping a job and making sure our baby is taken care of, but I'm not ready to take on anything else.
And there's always the option of selling a design. I mean, it is your baby, but that happens as well, is that a designer comes up with the concept and then just says, if you want to buy it, it's yours. It's up to you to publish. It's up to you. Just credit me and give me the money up front, or give me a percentage down the road. But I did my work. Now it's yours. Okay, I'm going to put the pressure on you a little bit more. Desert Island game. It is the one game you are left with for the rest of your life. What's it going to be? You, your wife, and your baby.
Oh, okay. A family game that we can all play.
Or, you can play with other people. I don't care. But, what's the game that you're going to keep if it's the one game you can play for the rest of your life?
Oh, boy. Well, that is a tough one. If it is a family game with my wife, so it would need to be something that she would be interested in playing with me as well. And she is interested in Pandemic, so that immediately comes to mind, is that game. And
have you played the expansions, like On the Brink?
I haven't, but that's the other thing, is that if there were expansions to it in as well, then I wouldn't have to think much farther for it. I would just have to. I would just say Pandemic with the expansions. Absolutely.
Sounds great. And play On the Brink. On the Brink is excellent. It to me takes Pandemic, which is a great game. I really like Pandemic, but it gets kind of mundane after many plays. On the Brink gives just enough of a kick without increasing complexity or anything that it makes it a much more dynamic and satisfying experience without really adding to the playtime or doing anything else. So for your desert island, I definitely recommend picking up at least On the Brink.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, it's got cute little petri dishes for all your diseases.
Oh, yeah.
And purple cubes, which purple is the best color for any board game piece. All right. Well, thank you so much, Mike.
Oh, thank you.
All right. Wasn't that excellent? Wasn't that great? Mike is a fantastic dude, and I'm so happy that we were able to have him on this podcast. And congratulations to Mike and your beautiful wife on the baby that you're about to have. And for all I know, by the time this actually goes onto iTunes, you'll already have had it. So congratulations to your family. You guys are the best. For the rest of you out there, thank you so much for listening. Again, we're going to have a mailbag episode coming up, so please send out any questions you have by email to cardboardherald@gmail.com or on Twitter @cardboardherald. We will definitely be reading those over, answering as many as we can get. The dream situation would we had too many questions to answer, and we had to do 2 mailbag episodes for you. So other than that, do check out the website, www.cardboardherald.com. Be on the lookout for new content and subscribe on iTunes. It would mean the world to us if you also would give us a rating. Thanks so much. My name's Jack, and you've been listening to the Cardboard Herald. Special thanks to this episode goes to the Death Force for allowing us to use your music in between the interview segments of this episode, as well as Christina Eddy, Rob Conley, John Foster, and Cheyenne Jones.